clothes, denial of yourself, restraint of shipmates. This theme, of course, is dominant in biblical tradition from Genesis on, but the theme itself, in its modern inversion, can handily be understood by a comparison of this speech of Tiresias to Odysseus in Homer in the Odyssey, with Tennyson's romantic Ulysses, who proposes like a genetic engineer or an atomic scientist to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. Obviously, unlike Homer's Odysseus, Tennyson's Ulysses is said to come from Dante, and he does resemble Dante's Ulysses pretty exactly. The critical difference being that Dante thought this Ulysses a madman and a fool, and brings down upon his Tennysonian speech to his sailors one of the swiftest anticlimaxes in literature. The real, the human knowledge, is understood as implying and imposing limits, much as marriage does, and these limits are understood to belong necessarily to the definition of a human being. In all this talk about marriage, I have not forgot that I am supposed to be talking about agriculture. I'm going to talk directly about agriculture in a minute, but I want to insist that I've been talking about it indirectly all along. For the analogy between marriage making and farm making, marriage keeping and farm keeping, is nearly exact. I've talked about marriage as a way of talking about farming because marriage as a human artifact has been more carefully understood than farming. More literate people have been in charge of it. The analogy between them is so close, for one thing, because they join us to time in nearly the same way. In talking about time, I will begin talking directly about farming, but as I do so, you will be aware, I hope, that I'm talking indirectly about marriage. When people speak with confidence of the longevity of diminishing agricultural sources, as when they speak of their good intentions about nuclear power, they are probably not just being gullible or thoughtless. They are likely to be speaking from belief in several tenets of industrial optimism, that life is long, but time and work are short, that every problem will be solved by a technological breakthrough before it enlarges to catastrophe, that any problem can be solved in a hurry by large applications of urgent emotion, information, and money. It is regrettable that these assumptions should risk correction by disaster when they could be so cheaply and safely overturned by the study of any agriculture that has proved durable. To the farmer, Emerson said, "The landscape is an armory of powers." As he meant it, the statement may be true, but the metaphor is ill-chosen. For the powers of a landscape are available to human use in nothing like so simple a way as are the powers of an armory, unless you're a strip miner. Or let us say anyhow that the preparations needed for the taking up of agricultural powers are more extensive and complex than those usually thought necessary for the taking up of arms. And let us add that the motives are, or ought to be, significantly different. Arms are taken up in hate, but it has not been uncharacteristic for a farmer's connection to a farm to begin in love. This has not always been so ignorant a love as it sometimes is now, but always, no matter what one's agricultural experience may have been, one's connection to a newly bought farm will begin in love that is more or less ignorant. One loves the place because present appearances recommend it, and because they suggest possibilities irresistibly imaginable. One's head grows full of visions. One walks over the premises saying, "If this were mine, I'd make a permanent pasture here. Here's where I'd plant an orchard. Here's where I'd dig a pond." These visions are the usual stuff of unfulfilled love and induce wakefulness at night. When one buys the farm and moves to it to live, something different begins. Thoughts begin to be translated into acts. Truth begins to intrude with its matter of fact. One's work may be defined in part by one's visions, but it is defined in part too by problems, which the work leads to and reveals. That is, until you've got problems, you probably haven't got any work. And daily life, work, and problems gradually alter the visions. It invariably turns out, I think, that one's first vision of one's place was to some extent an imposition on it. But if one's sight is clear, and if one stays on and works well, one's love gradually responds to the place as it really is, and one's visions gradually image possibilities that are really in it. Vision, possibility, work, and life all have changed by mutual correction. Correct discipline, given enough time, gradually removes oneself from one's line of sight. One works to better purpose then and makes fewer mistakes, because at last one sees where one is. Two human possibilities of the highest order thus come within reach. What one wants can become the same as what one has. And one's knowledge can cause respect for what one knows. Correct discipline and enough time are inseparable notions. Correct discipline cannot be hurried, for it is both the knowledge of what ought to be done and the willingness to do it, all of it, properly. The good worker will not suppose that good work can be made properly answerable to haste, urgency, or even emergency. But the good worker knows, too, that after it is done, work requires yet more time to prove its worth. One must stay to experience and study and understand the consequences. Must understand them by living with them, and then correct them, if necessary, by longer living and more work. It won't do to correct mistakes made in one place by moving to another place, as has been the common fashion in America, or by adding on another place, as is the fashion in any sort of growth economy. Seen this way, questions about farming become inseparable from questions about propriety of scale. A farm can be too big for a farmer to husband properly or pay proper attention to. Distraction is inimical to correct discipline, and enough time is beyond the reach of anyone who has too much to do. But we must go farther and see that propriety of scale is invariably associated with propriety of another kind, an understanding and acceptance of the human place in the order of creation, a proper humility. A proper humility is one of the inescapable prerequisites of correct discipline. There are some things the arrogant mind does not see. It is blinded and remains blinded by its vision of what it desires. It does not see what is already there. It never sees the forest that precedes the farm, or the farm that precedes the shopping center. It will never understand that America was discovered by the Indians. It is the properly humbled mind in its proper place that sees truly, because, to give only one reason, it sees details. And the good farmer understands that further limits are imposed upon haste by nature, which, except for an occasional storm or earthquake, is in no hurry either. In the processes of most concern to agriculture, the building and preserving of fertility, nature is never in a hurry. During the last 17 years, for example, I've been working at the restoration of a once exhausted hillside. Its scars are now healed over, though still visible. And this year it has provided more abundant pasture than in any year since we have owned it. But to make it as good as it now is has taken 17 years. If I had been a millionaire, or if my family had been starving, it would still have taken 17 years. It can be better than it is now, but that will take longer. For it to live fully in its own possibility, as it did before bad use ran it down, may take hundreds of years. But to think of the human use of a piece of land as continuing through hundreds of years, we must greatly complicate our understanding of agriculture. Let us start a job of farming on a given place, say an initially fertile hillside in the Kentucky River Valley, and construe it through time.